Hi, everybody, and welcome to season 4 of Blame It on Marketing. And to kick us off, we've got a very special guest who we will let introduce himself in a minute. But for this episode, we are talking about marketing and marketers that are kind of doomed to fail from the outset. It's a bit of a sad one, but hopefully we'll turn it around by the end. So, Justin, without further ado, please introduce yourself.
Hey guys, thanks for having me on. My name is Justin Rowe. For those who don't know me, I am the founder and CMO of Impactable. Formerly it was Lincoln Learn, my first startup that was acquired by Impactable and a data-heavy investor. We're now one of the larger LinkedIn ads agencies in the US, although we do have clients in Australia and UK and abroad. And I just generally love marketing. I consider myself a broad marketer. So even though I do run a LinkedIn ads agency, I'm very much just in love with all the different channels and marketing as a whole, as an ecosystem. And yeah, you guys are my kind of people since you're in that boat as well.
Awesome. Thank you so much for joining us. I guess, yeah, Emma mentioned it's a little bit of a maybe depressing episode. We don't mean it in that way. I don't think. We just want to talk about basically people taking on new jobs, new roles, or going into a new project, and sometimes those projects are just we're never going to work out, and we want to talk about that essentially. Justin, why do you think that some marketers are just kind of doomed to fail from the outset on a new role or a project that they're involved in?
I think one of the big things that we kind of talked about and kind of prepped for this is the idea of, well, I guess for marketers, they're destined to fail from that sense. From the get-go of who they partner with could be a big one. And it's one of those ideas where I don't care how good of a marketer you are. There's so many things that go into launching a successful campaign for a company there's so many variables and it changes with each client that I would say, yeah, destined to fail as a marketer. Like if you pair yourself with the wrong client, the wrong company, there's no fixing a lot of whatever if the foundation's missing there. So that's a big one.
I think the one that I've seen a lot and you've got zero control over is product. So sometimes the product just isn't right or isn't positioned well or just isn't viable yet, but you're expected to market it. And I feel like that's one that's super hard to get around because marketers kind of in this day and age don't touch product whatsoever.
Yeah, and they can dress it up or they can try to present it in the best way they can. But yeah, especially if you don't have product market fit, like if you don't necessarily know exactly who you best serve and how you serve them better than anyone else, you're like, hey, we do this too. Like there's a lot of like vague CRMs or tools or this or that, and they're like, hey, we do the same thing as all these other guys, and it's like that's a really bad place to start, but we got our work cut out for us.
Yeah, and I think alongside that product issue is also the pricing. We've talked about this quite a bit, haven't we, before, which is that, again, we don't necessarily get to have any sort of influence or steer on the pricing, and most of the time you sort of hope that people have kind of benchmarked against their competitors. But sometimes that's difficult, especially, in SaaS, there's still a little bit of like, I don't want to put our price on the website, those sorts of things. And when you kind of guard that stuff and you keep it away from people, again, you're fighting an uphill battle because it's really hard to market something that is either priced completely like wildly incorrectly or like you're just not honest about your pricing model from the outset. I mean, in SaaS, it's a bit more of a standard, but when you get into sort of professional services, those sorts of realms, it's like, God, you're not allowed to put the price anywhere. So I think those two things fundamentally, if you have no influence on that as a marketer, or it's a bad product, you are kind of like doomed from the outset, aren't you? I'm interested to know as well, so like what are some of the other maybe foundational issues that marketers kind of have when it comes to kind of getting set up for success?
I think what you just mentioned there is honestly a big one. There's just some foundational ways of doing things or thinking about things that could be so misaligned for a marketer in a company. For example, if they refuse to say, we will not like let prospects know our pricing until they book a call with sales, like that's going to be a big obstacle to overcome. Or if they say we are not leaving the MQL model. Like that is, you as a marketer, your job is not, I don't care about your demand gen fluffy ideas. You're going to get us leads. That's what you're here for. Like if that's the mentality you're coming into, like, I mean, good luck with that. And there's so many other things like what fields they require on lead gen forms and how many fields are on like the form. Like, there's some things that some executives and companies are so like entrenched in and that they won't give up. That would handcuff the best marketer in the world. I mean, there's nothing I can do with that, or there's not as much I could do with that. It's so limiting. Or how, yeah, I mean, I could go on. There's one of the other ones is how isolating channels some executives want to be so that they can track everything. They're so obsessed with tracking that they would rather send all the traffic to, the worst siloed HubSpot landing page in the world versus dare let like the prospects see their actual website, because we can't just isolate that and see, just know 100% sure where it came from, and basing the whole marketing strategy on what we can track and not let them create a marketing strategy and then figure out how to track it. So there's a lot of fundamental and foundational just ways of approaching marketing and business in general that if a marketer and company aren't aligned, like, yeah, that would be pretty disastrous.
One of the things that absolutely kills me is the tools and the lack of tools that people try and work with and work around with too. So you go into a business, they don't like, maybe they're already a little bit like, you've got a marketing budget, but like you say, it's kind of like specific channels only. Don't experiment. But then you don't have any of the tools in place to actually be able to do your job properly. I know these are some of the things that you should definitely ask when you're being interviewed, or when when you are interviewing them. But I think it's amazing the amount of people who will be like, oh, I can try and do this without a CRM or without, like the marketing tools that I need. And it's like, you just can't. And trying to get people to understand that you need them from the outset is sometimes really hard, isn't it, Ruta?
Yeah, and I've seen it the other way too, by the way. I've seen way too many tools. Like, I've seen a company spend like £1 million a year on tools for like a 5-person marketing team. Like, technology is not your problem here, when you get to that point. And obviously that's all coming out of the marketing budget, right? So you've got to battle that. So yeah, I've seen it both ways for sure. But just the basic stuff to do your job is necessary, and you will have to pay for it, because that's just kind of how it works, which some people don't like doing sometimes.
And that's another good point too, just how the marketing budget seems to be sometimes a lot more nitpicked over, and even little like SaaS tools that are like would be basic necessities are viewed as like almost like extras, whereas you go look at the crazy tech stack that the sales team is allowed to have and how wasteful and inefficient and unused like some of that is. But yeah, try to get like a $30 subscription and they're like, oh, I don't know about that. But yeah, I've seen the other where there's $800, $900, $1,000 a month like attribution tools and stuff that will show you things. That's like cool to have, but then like you don't necessarily need those to fundamentally do your job, of course.
Definitely. So on this side, obviously some of this is on the marketer side. Like there are definite questions that we should be asking, if you are taking on a new job. And I think, if you can pinpoint some of those things, you can kind of go, actually, this maybe isn't the job for me, because there's, enough to know that there are fundamental issues with the role you're walking into and the product that you're going to be trying to help sell. But what happens when you kind of got a founder or senior leadership that kind of get marketing but don't necessarily understand the specialisms or have any kind of respect for them either?
Yeah, that's a tough one. And I do think the part of the role of like the modern marketer is to help educate and facilitate change and to help bring people along. And I've kind of realized that like my role as a marketer, and that's why I think this episode, as funny or depressing as the title might be, like what my hope is with a topic like this is that there's some education that penetrates executives that say, hey, maybe I don't know how this works, or maybe I'm looking at this wrong, or maybe I should like this sounds like what someone so-and-so from marketing was telling me. Maybe I should actually listen. Maybe they weren't crazy. Because yeah, I think that's a pretty big one. And what I would do is, yeah, I would be educational, and I do think also marketers need to. I don't like how some of the demand gen marketers almost seem to like be allergic to attribution. And it's like demand gen is like opposed to attribution. Like I don't like that viewpoint, and I think that could be detrimental, because I do think like I'm also like a data kind of guy. Like I believe in the demand gen movement, but I back it up, and I would show that with actual stats. And I would say that would be the best path. Like most of these executives, they understand numbers, and a lot of the flaws with some of the modern demand gen marketers is that they're like averse to numbers. So I don't think they make the best case for and showing the science of the numbers of why this is right. So I think that could be really beneficial on both sides if we got better at, showing those numbers. And okay, we need to move it. It's not about the number of MQLs we get. Let's look at quality. Well, how do we test that? Well, what are the show up rates of these leads by source? What's the close rate of these leads by source? What's the deal size? Because theoretically, if demand gen is done right, you will get less leads, but they'll be more likely to show up. They'll be more likely to buy. And when they do, because they trust you more, they're likely to opt into longer time frames, or, add on, not do such a small testing period. They're going to open up their wallets more, but that should be verifiable with data. And it's hard, but I think that's the conversation that probably needs to happen more often.
Completely. I think also, as you said, the education bit, so educating people that are not marketers around like the different jobs that there are and the different skills that you need. So I think we spoke on our prep about this, but you mentioned like, you're an ad agency, but sometimes people expect you to do the graphic design and like all the ad creative and all of those things, and it's like, no, those are jobs for like a whole other specialty and team, not to be like pushing work off, but it's a completely different skill set, right? So educating around that is super important.
And that lack of understanding, again, is like it's another part of the like being doomed to fail, right? Because even when you go into a startup and you're kind of people rely on you to be able to do a bit of everything, there's a point where you still need to work with your senior leaders to help them understand that we might need a PPC agency or like a freelance content writer and a graphic designer, because one person cannot fulfill all of those roles, not to the same quality as a specialist. That's just the way it is. So I think that also goes back to their understanding, but it also goes back to your budget as well, and not being afraid to be like, actually, in order to do the best work, we need to hire the right specialists, or bring in the right specialist agencies to do the job. But that doesn't make you any less of a marketer if you can't do those things. We've talked about this before, haven't we, Ruta? Which is like, especially when you're early on in your career, we're old hats. We're all old hats now. Like, you want to say that you can do everything because you want to prove yourself, but you're also dooming yourself to fail, I think, when you're like, I can do it all. It's like, no, actually, sometimes you should learn when to say, I can't. We need to get someone in who can do this.
Outside of your core competency, usually take 4 or 5 times longer. So the more you agree to, and the more you kind of diversify from like your core, whatever, like, it can really bog things down, and then the quality suffers a lot in those situations, I guess.
Everyone's mad. So we've spoken about a bunch of foundational problems, a bunch of kind of expectational problems is what I would call them. So maybe it would be good for us to kind of start thinking about how we can avoid some of those as marketers. And also, is it always marketing's fault? I don't know. Is it always everyone else's fault? I don't know. But maybe if we can each pick something that we've done before potentially to solve some of those issues and share it, I think that would be quite useful.
I can start. So for this, I guess, I would definitely say it's not always the marketer's fault. In fact, I would probably stick up for the marketers. Usually there's just a barrier, a language barrier, I think, between marketers and executives on both sides. One of the things that, we run into a lot is that, specifically is that, we're a LinkedIn ads agency, but we are more channel partners, technical strategy, structure, optimization. What we are not is a branding, positioning agency. We're not crafting the offer or helping that. And we're also not a design agency. So I think one of the big disconnects that we get is that people come to us, our best clients that we work with, they have in-house design teams. They're bringing their own designs. We help distribute those. So there's a big misalignment if someone comes to us and they think of us as, and maybe it's, I don't know, to Netflix or just movies. They think that we're like some, really high production studio that's going to create like these blow your socks off ads. And that's what they're coming for us. Like they think of like, okay, and then you're going to put those on LinkedIn, which anyone could do. But like that deep level of expertise of putting them on LinkedIn, that structure, that technical, like that is like our core. And so some of the things that we do to kind of put that in perspective for clients is we say, hey, we try to educate them like lovingly, and we say, hey, it's clear to us that this design is really important to you. So what we can do is we can pair you, or we can give you some referrals of design agencies. Here's their pricing. And then when they see that comparison of like what they actually want and what people are actually charging for that versus what they're paying us for and what the budget is for like copy and creative, because we do offer some of that as convenience, but yeah, that's not our core thing. So when they see that comparison, like, our budget for copy and creative on your account, if you were having us, is, $300 or $500 like in a month, what you're asking for is probably like a $3,000 to $5,000 to $8,000 package, which, if that's really important, like, great, here's the best people that do it. I think this is what you're looking for, and this is the price. And then when they see that, like, it's more like, oh, okay, I didn't realize there was such a big like disparity between like this quality and pricing, and now I'm satisfied, or I'm more happy with what we have now. I think this will work. Like, oh, okay, I'm glad we could align on that. But instead of just like trying to do what they want and trying to get these high budget like image, like they'll never be satisfied with what you produce, and you're probably going to end up like losing money or souring that relationship by trying. But instead, by sidestepping and say, hey, I think this is what you want, and this is what that's actually going to cost and look like, that can do a lot of level setting for clients. And I think that could apply in a lot of different areas.
I think so. I think first of all, because it's definitely not the marketer's fault that this happens. Although I do go back to like there are questions you need to ask from the outset. Otherwise, and be thoughtful when you're taking a job. That's the first thing. But outside of that, I think it's okay. I really like the idea that most marketers are like the T-shaped marketer thing, where we've got like a few general things that all of us can do, and then most of us have like a deep specialism, or are developing that deep specialism based on stuff that we like and that we're good at. And I think that's okay, and I think that's good. But I think it's good to be aware of what those things are for you and be honest about them. And then I think, like, for me, when I work with a new client, the most important thing is to really fully understand and scope out what the work is, and where there's scope creep, or there's, stuff that's not really within the remit of the product. Like, quite a lot of the stuff that so I'll do loads of generalist stuff for people, step in, but then I do like community and advocacy work. And those are really specific bits of work. Outside of that, like especially with like advocacy, for example, like everyone's like, oh, but you run the advocacy program and then presumably you create the content, and it's like, no, because I'm not a copywriter, I'm not a content person. So I'm not going to sit and interview your clients to get the stuff. I just know how to set up the program and get it running and all that kind of stuff. So again, I think it just goes back to Justin's point. I think it's like you then have a group of people that you can go back to and refer and be like, well, actually, here's a really good copywriter that has worked on these sorts of projects before. And yeah, from the outset, when you're scoping all that out, be really clear on like what resource those kind of projects require. So it's like, I will not take a community project now unless somebody says to me at some point, we're hiring a community manager. I won't do it, because I'm like, you at some point you're going to need a community manager. So if you don't want to hire one, then you don't want a community. And that's that. And I think it's okay to be upfront about that stuff.
Completely. I do a similar thing with clients, by the way, Emma, like when we decide what the priorities are to work on, we then decide how we're going to do those and like complete those priorities, because it's not just me or whoever the internal person is, there might be some specialty skills that you need to bring in, or just extra hands, right? So we decide on the task list and on the resource list up front, which you can do as an in-house marketer, I think, quite well. So let's say you're using OKRs or something like that to plan your quarter or month. Make sure that you're accounting for what resources you need, and make sure that then whoever's managing you agrees on those, because then you're on the same page. So I think that's very doable on both sides. But one thing that I do think marketers are at fault for, if I can play devil's advocate, is sometimes not communicating in the same language. And I think what I'm thinking of really here is picking up on Justin's points about numbers. You are a marketer, and I'm going to be pretty harsh here and say you are responsible for understanding your audience, because that's what we do. So if we're talking to a bunch of super analytical, busy, uncreative people, let's make sure that we present information that is relevant to them, obviously, but also that they can appreciate, because it's the right information that they understand. So, talking to someone like that about some really amazing creative campaign, and how like these words fill into these words, and how it's all going to come together, probably the reception is going to be a little bit cold. But showing them, like Justin said, we have decreased leads and we've moved away from that, but actually our conversion rates are up for how many people show up to the meetings, and how many people end up closing deals, or our deal size is up, or our renewals are looking better, and like the onboarding team is onboarding quicker. Show them that, give them the numbers, like whatever they might be, but just it's not just about knowing your audience that you market to, it's also knowing your audience internally, and how to communicate with them, which I know exhausting, and hopefully you shouldn't have to do it, but you do need to do it.
The ones like above you, or the ones that you report to, you need to report to them in the same language that they speak. And I forget who did it, but one of the things I liked was they were talking about how they were trying to go from lead gen to demand gen, but what they did was they were talking to the executives, and they like basically took like a scientific approach, and they were saying, okay, our hypothesis is that if we make these adjustments, we will get less leads, but our bet is that these, the show up rate will increase. Here's how we're going to track this. Here's, what the time frame that we're looking at it from, set something realistic. And make it more of a, like, if you have if you're doing this for a reason, like, I think the part of the thing is, like, a lot of marketers aren't good at explaining, like, the why behind what they do. Like, they almost, like, know that it works, and they have, like, intuition and gut. And I feel like a lot of good marketers have these, like, good intuition, but it is a separate little skill to be able to actually verbalize that in a way that, like, a normal human being could understand. So yeah, there's the math side of it, but there's also like breaking just simple marketing philosophy or strategies down into like understandable language, which can be a challenge.
Can founders or senior leaders do, if anyone's into it. I came up with this on the spot. It might be the worst idea ever, so just get ready. When you set up a new marketing team, or maybe hire like a senior marketer, put yourself in the student's shoes. So maybe schedule something with them where they get to talk to you about stuff and teach you things. So it's not you asking, oh, why are you doing that? It's, oh, could you please tell me, because I want to learn about this. And it kind of changes, I think, the balance a little bit in that conversation. Again, might be the worst idea ever. Let me know if any one of you have done this before.
That is not the worst idea. And I feel like I've started to do that a little inside of Impactable, because I actually am bolting on now expertise outside of some of the areas that so yeah, I would say I'm a T-shaped marketer, or maybe more like a square-shaped marketer. I feel like I'm medium depth on like maybe like 5 or 6. I don't know if that's a thing, but I'm like a square-shaped marketer. So we recently hired, I believe, we want to support our clients more full channel. So we want to support Google search, and we hired a in-house Google Ads expert. Now, she is much better technically at that channel than I am. And so what I've done though is like I'm working with her, and yeah, I'm very honest with her and saying, hey, like you in this area, like I know it feels weird because I hired you, but in this area you know more than I do, and I'm relying on like your opinion, and I also need education so I understand better what I can do and what I can't do with this channel. So I do think that would be an amazing idea for executives. Like have a basic understanding of what the channel's for, what you can do, what you can't do, because again, these channel partners are not going to have the overall strategy. You have to come to them with this idea of, hey, this is what I want to do, and I think this is how we can leverage this channel. You tell me if that's crazy, and they'll give you feedback and be like, it's not crazy, but this would be the limitation, or maybe we could try to do it this way. But you have to come to them with that, and then be open to them telling you how it works, how it doesn't work, what you can do. Because I would say that's the big, a huge gap is executives a lot of times don't know the capabilities of each channel to know how, what they could do cohesively. And so, it is a lot of siloed just stuff going on because of that.
Oh, here's one that blows everyone's minds that I ever tell it to. Like, I can't think of a non-marketing senior exec that knew about this, and it's retargeting. Just the fact that we can just gather a group of people in our lists or that came onto our website and then just keep showing them ads. It's incredible.
Magic. It's literally magic.
Mind blowing. I wonder if the e-com marketers have heard of that. I feel like they have. They heard about that a while ago.
Well, that's how you explain how you do that. It's like, when you go to look at that pair of shoes and then they follow you around the internet. We can do that too.
But you can use those. I think that using those B2C examples is really useful, actually, because that is personal then, and you can connect, you can understand. Because that comes up quite a lot in conversation. I've got one client in particular who stands out to me as a group of senior leaders who really genuinely want to learn and understand marketing, and they take the time. And we very often do talk about like those B2C examples or like experiences that they have in shops, things like that. And I'm like, well, how can we represent that? Like, we're B2B, but how can we represent some of those things? Obviously, we can't. It's not going to be ever quite the same, but like, how can we capture some of those feelings that you've had when you've had good experiences through our marketing? And so, I think it's just it's openness, isn't it? To learn and to accept that you don't necessarily know everything, even though you might be the CEO.
And it goes both ways, right? Like, your CEO can teach you a shit ton about business strategy or, I don't know, the market you're in or whatever it might be, and you can teach them similarly. So I think it's openness both ways.
And working through personal experience, I think, is a good way to say, to help them understand. Like, I feel like a lot of times I am kind of like using those references and saying, hey, like, think of, how we came to the decision of, or I'll walk them through my personal example of like how I, came to the decision of buying like, or this CRM or, this, whatever, like, this is my journey. I've, visited the website, and then I started seeing their ads. This retargeting ad in particular touched on a specific pain point that was pretty relevant to me and that I was looking to solve. So I engaged a little more, and then, I started, I signed up for their newsletter, and then, that was really valuable. And then when it was time for me to buy, like, I knew who was the number one, like, go-to option in my mind because of all these things. Well, all of those things were like intentional, like, retargeting tactics and, community building tactics for that end goal. Like, that was the method. That's what we want to do, or that's what we, so like, walking them through like that journey and what that experience is as a user, if they either personally experienced it or you walk them through yours, I think that is a powerful learning tool.
Yeah, very true. Wonderful. Is there anything, Justin, that we should have asked you about this topic that we didn't?
I don't think so. I feel like I got to get the main sentiments out there, especially the broad versus the channel experts. And I do think that education and kind of like us getting better at showing the data is a big part of it. But no, I think those are pretty good questions and good topics for this one.
Fabulous. So I'm going to say let's wrap up for today's episode. Thank you, Justin, so much for joining us. We will leave all the different details about Justin's work, his LinkedIn, etc., in the show notes. And Justin, if you want to give us anything, we'll put them in there too. And thank you so much for sharing with us. We hope you found this useful and it wasn't too depressing, because we didn't mean it to be. And we'll see you on the next episode.